They stopped him before he could take another step. The guards didn't shout. They didn't insult him. They simply raised a hand and said, "Sir, please step aside." To them, he looked like just another old man. Wrinkled hands, slow walk, quiet eyes. Behind him stood soldiers, families, and officers, all waiting for the funeral to continue. Then the bugle lifted. The first note cut through the air, and everything changed. The guards froze. The crowd went silent. The old man didn't move, because the song being played wasn't for the fallen. It was his. In that moment, they realized the truth. They weren't blocking a guest. They were standing in front of a living legend. The cemetery was quiet in the way only military funerals are. Not silent, but controlled. Rows of uniforms stood straight beneath the open sky. Boots aligned, shoulders squared, faces unreadable. The flags barely moved as the wind passed through them. At the center of it all was a coffin draped in colors that meant sacrifice. The ceremony had already begun when the old man arrived. He didn't come with an escort. He didn't announce himself. He walked slowly along the gravel path, his steps careful, his posture worn by time. His uniform was old, not outdated but aged. The fabric had faded. The medals on his chest were real, but dull, scratched by decades of life. To the younger soldiers, he looked misplaced. Two guards noticed him as he approached the front. They exchanged a glance, professional, trained, cautious. One stepped forward and raised a hand. "Sir," he said calmly, "this area is restricted." The old man stopped. Up close, his face told a story no words could explain. Lines carved deep by years of discipline, loss, and survival. His eyes weren't confused. They weren't angry. They were steady. "I need to stand there," he replied quietly. The guard hesitated. "I'm sorry, sir," the second guard added, voice firm but respectful. Only family and assigned personnel are allowed beyond this point. Around them, a few heads turned. Whispers began. Some thought the man was lost. Others assumed he didn't understand the protocol. No one recognized him. The old man nodded slowly, accepting the words, but not stepping away. "I'll only take a moment," he said. The guards held their ground. They weren't being cruel. They were doing their duty. The officer overseeing the ceremony noticed the delay, but didn't intervene yet. Procedures mattered. Order mattered. The old man looked past them, toward the coffin. For a brief second, his expression softened. Memory crossed his face like a shadow. Then, a command echoed. "Bugle." Everything paused. The guard still stood in front of him as the musician lifted the instrument. The first note rang out. Clear, sharp, unforgiving. The old man straightened. His shoulders pulled back. His chin lifted. The guards felt it before they understood it. Something in the air changed. And as the melody continued, realization began to spread. That the man they were blocking was not out of place. He was exactly where he belonged. When the music spoke louder than rank, the bugle's sound carried across the cemetery like a voice from another time. Each note was slow, measured, heavy with meaning. The guard stood frozen, not by fear but by instinct. The old man had changed. Moments earlier, he looked fragile. Now, he stood taller than anyone present. His back straightened as if pulled by an invisible command. His shoulders locked into position. His chin lifted exactly to regulation height. Not an inch more, not an inch less. The guard on the left noticed it first. That posture, it wasn't taught anymore. He had seen it only once before, in an old training video, grainy and black and white, narrated by a retired officer who spoke of a generation forged in fire, not technology. The melody continued. The old man raised his right hand. Not slowly, not weakly, with precision. His fingers came together. His palm angled perfectly. The salute snapped into place, sharp, exact, undeniable. The guards' breathing caught in their throats. That salute wasn't imitation. It was muscle memory, decades old. Across the crowd, murmurs faded into silence. Veterans in attendance felt it immediately. Some straightened. Others lowered their eyes. A few clenched their jaws as memories surged forward without permission. The officer overseeing the ceremony turned fully now. He watched the salute. Then he saw the medals. Not the shine, the placement. Every ribbon was positioned with mathematical accuracy. Campaign bars aligned from wars that hadn't been spoken of in years. Conflicts mentioned only in history books or not mentioned at all. The officer's expression changed. He took a step closer. The bugle played on. The guards were still blocking the old man, but they no longer felt like they were in control. The left guard swallowed hard. "Sir," he began, his voice quieter now. The old man didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on the flag-draped coffin. Tears welled, not falling, just waiting. The final note of the bugle echoed into the sky and disappeared. Silence followed. Not a single sound. No wind. No movement. No breath dared to be loud. The officer stepped forward sharply. "Guards," he said. Both men snapped to attention instantly. The officer raised his own hand in salute, not toward the coffin, toward the old man. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The guards froze in shock. The officer lowered his salute and spoke with authority, his voice steady but respectful. "Step aside." The guards moved immediately. They didn't hesitate. They didn't question. The path opened. The old man lowered his salute slowly, then walked forward alone. Each step was deliberate, not rushed, not heavy, purposeful. When he reached the coffin, he stopped. For a moment, he simply stood there. Then he removed his cap. His hands trembled, not from age, but from restraint. He placed the cap gently atop the flag. His voice came out low, barely above a whisper. "You did good, son." Those 3 words broke something in the air. A woman in the crowd covered her mouth. A young soldier blinked rapidly, fighting tears. An older veteran turned away, his shoulders shaking. The officer approached and stood beside the old man. "Sir," he said quietly, "permission to escort you." The old man shook his head. "I'll stand here," he replied, "like I always have." The officer nodded. No rank challenged him. No rule questioned him. Because now, everyone understood. This man wasn't a guest. He wasn't a mourner asking for access. He was a survivor of a time when soldiers didn't return to parades, they returned to silence. The guard stood back, eyes lowered, humbled. They had blocked him with duty. But duty had just taught them a lesson. And the ceremony continued. Not just honoring the fallen, but honoring the living legend who stood before them. The name that changed everything. The officer stood beside the old man for several seconds, saying nothing. Protocol told him to ask questions. Rank demanded clarity, but instinct told him to listen. Slowly, the officer turned to the master of ceremonies and nodded once. The ceremony paused. Every eye followed. The officer cleared his throat. "For the record," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "May I have your name, sir?" The old man didn't answer immediately. He looked at the coffin again. Then, finally, he spoke. "Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer. Retired." The words moved through the crowd like a shockwave. A veteran near the back stiffened. Another whispered, "No, that can't be." The officer's breath caught. He had read that name. Everyone in command had. Mercer wasn't just a soldier. He was a file that never closed. A legend spoken in training rooms in low voices. Not because of superstition, but because the missions tied to his name were still classified long after the wars ended. The officer straightened. "Sir," he said carefully, "were you assigned to?" Mercer raised a hand gently. "Not today." The officer nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." The respect in his voice wasn't ceremonial. It was personal. The master of ceremonies hesitated, then spoke quietly into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue, we will acknowledge the presence of a veteran of exceptional service." Murmurs rippled outward. Mercer stepped back half a pace, uncomfortable with attention. The officer continued. "This funeral honors a soldier who fell in service. But we also recognize a man who trained him, led him, and once saved his life." The crowd inhaled sharply. A young soldier near the front whispered, "He trained him." An older veteran nodded slowly, eyes glistening. More than that. The officer turned toward Mercer again. "Sir," he said, "permission to share?" Mercer hesitated. Then he nodded once. The officer faced the crowd. "Staff Sergeant Mercer served for 36 years, he announced. 3 wars, multiple theaters. He declined every public honor offered to him. A pause. He was known for bringing his men home. Silence fell. The officer continued. "The soldier we honor today was one of his last. A woman stepped forward from the family section, tears streaming. She stared at Mercer, recognition dawning. The man he talked about, she whispered. Mercer nodded slowly. He was brave, Mercer said. Braver than he ever realized. The woman broke down, and another family member held her upright. The guards watched from their position, stunned. The left guard's hands trembled slightly. He had stopped this man, blocked him, questioned him, and yet Mercer showed no anger, only presence. The officer gestured gently. Sir, he said, would you do us the honor? Mercer understood without explanation. He stepped forward again. The master of ceremonies handed him the folded flag. The weight surprised him, not physically, but emotionally. He turned toward the family. His voice was steady, but layered with history. This flag, he said, represents duty fulfilled and a promise kept. He handed it to the woman. Your son stood when it mattered. He didn't break. He didn't run. Mercer paused. Neither did any of you. The family clutched the flag as if it were a living thing. The officer saluted Mercer again, sharper than before. This time the guards followed. Perfectly. The crowd rose to its feet. Not on command. On instinct. Mercer lowered his head slightly. Not in pride. In humility. Because the hardest burden wasn't being unknown. It was being remembered. And today, for the first time in years, his name had returned to the air. The lesson no one forgot. The ceremony resumed, but nothing felt the same. The guards stood at attention, yet their minds were elsewhere. The left guard replayed the moment again and again. The raised hand, the calm voice, the refusal to move. He had followed protocol, but protocol had almost blinded him. When the family returned to their seats, the officer dismissed the formation briefly. The guards didn't move. Not until Mercer stepped back. He paused in front of them. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the right guard broke. Sir, he said, voice tight, I'm sorry. Mercer looked at him. Not sternly, not dismissively, patiently. You did your job, Mercer replied. That matters. The guard swallowed. I didn't recognize. Mercer shook his head gently. You weren't supposed to. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only they could hear. Respect isn't about knowing someone's name. It's about how you treat them before you know it. The words hit harder than any reprimand. The guards nodded, both of them fighting emotion. Nearby, young soldiers had overheard everything. They stood straighter, not because of command, but because understanding had reached them. One of them whispered, that's what real rank looks like. Mercer moved away and sat on a bench beneath a tree. An old veteran approached him slowly, cane in hand. Didn't think I'd ever see you again, the man said with a tired smile. Mercer chuckled softly. Still standing, Bill. They shared a look filled with decades. No words were needed. The officer watched from a distance. He realized something uncomfortable. The strongest leaders weren't always visible. Some carried their authority quietly in how they stood, how they remembered, how they honored others without demanding recognition. When the ceremony ended, people didn't rush away. They lingered. Soldiers approached Mercer, not for stories, not for photos, just to shake his hand, to say thank you. Mercer accepted each gesture with humility. Then, as quietly as he had arrived, he prepared to leave. The guards stepped aside instantly this time, not because they were told, because they knew. True honor needs no introduction. As Mercer walked down the gravel path, the wind picked up again. Flags fluttered. The sound echoed softly. Behind him, a young soldier watched until Mercer disappeared from view. He turned to his friend and said, I hope when I'm old, I'm half the man he is. The officer overheard and nodded. So do I, he replied. Mercer reached the gate and paused. He looked back once, not at the crowd, not at the uniforms, at the sky, at the silence, at the memory of those who never made it this far. He adjusted his cap and walked on. No escort, no ceremony, no applause. And that was fitting, because true honor doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand space. It doesn't need permission to stand where it belongs. Sometimes, the greatest legends are the ones no one recognizes. Until it's too late, or just in time.